Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at an overview on the recent media blitz that was done with Final Fantasy XVI. When the Ambition trailer released, Yoshi P told us that we were going to be seeing a bunch of interviews coming out in the near future, that they were in the process of conducting those. And well, they did. There was like 4 or 5 Japanese media sites, an Italian one, a few English ones, and I'm sure there are others scattered about as well. But we're going to be going over the more important points, because a lot of those interviews kind of just reiterate the same things. Some of it's new information, some of it's retreading on old ground, things about, the human versus summon beast stuff and, the kaiju battles and stuff like that, as well as some characters that were introduced in the Ambition trailer that have descriptions on the site. Pretty much every interview had, questions about those particular characters. So we're going to be looking at the things that were a little unique in each of the different interviews. Now, obviously, I don't speak Japanese. Best I could do is right-click translate to English. And so we are going to be using the unofficial translations coming from @itekimochi on Twitter. Many of you probably recognize Audrey. She has done translations for many things for Final Fantasy, and we've been referencing her since 7 Remake started coming out with a ton of different stuff, especially that Ultimania. So thank you, Audrey. We're always grateful for this. Either way, we're going to be looking at the summary of her tweets and the translations she did for this video. So let's get started. So the first few bits here are about the game's actual progress. I know they said summer of 2023, and I think a lot of us believe it, but I also think that a lot of us hardcore Square Enix fans have that cynical thought in the back of our mind where we're like, oh yeah, it'll be done soon, see you in 10 years. But no, it's very much underway. The game is 95% finished at this point, with them focusing on debugs, refining parts, and sound tuning. Special note about that one, Soken put out a tweet about that sound tuning tweet and said that he was essentially in hell. I don't know if that means he's having fun at the moment, but it's just an acknowledgement of the statements that are being made here. Speaking of Final Fantasy XVI's progress and release window, the release date should be revealed to us before the end of the year. They say hopefully, so it's not a guarantee. However, I think most of us would predict the Game Awards or maybe a surprise state of play before the end of year would be a reasonable place to expect this kind of news. Probably not just it popping up on Twitter randomly, although that could happen. Now, the actual release date might be a bit earlier than you expect, and I think this goes towards a trend that we're actually seeing kind of start with Crisis Core coming out in December. We were told Crisis Core would release this coming winter. Now, this winter can mean anywhere from mid to late December all the way until March, but it's actually releasing, 13 days into December, which definitely caught me way off guard. So I think a lot of us are expecting when we hear summer 2023, an August or even potentially September release. However, earlier than you expect, mid to late June would be earlier than I expect, and that would be a great release window right after the return of E3, I suppose. I think we're supposed to get that back this year, but that would be dope. I know Audrey was predicting June 16th as a potential date. Audrey, I'll take it. A demo will release right before the release of the actual game. So here's the thing. If you want to release that demo around the time you announce the release date, that's just a few months. That's technically across the span of the game. That's a little before the release, copium. Wait, hold on. Yeah, probably not until like April or May, if I had to guess, realistically. Marketing PR plan will kick into motion towards the end of this year and early January 2023. Honestly, it's kind of already been doing that, but I guess they mean like really hardcore. Like you'll see ads for it, you'll see more trailers, you'll see more frequent updates about the game and its features, etc., etc. Like we've started to see for Forspoken now that that's approaching its now February. Or is it February? January. I don't remember. It's coming out soon, but they've started to ramp things up and put out a lot more video about the game and its game systems. Now, moving on to the actual contents of the game, the story centers around Clive and the friends he encounters throughout his journey. What's been very interesting about this is that Clive has not been an incredibly in-depth presence in the trailers thus far. They've really focused on explaining what is Valisthea, who are the dominants, what are these icons, trying to present kind of like the scale. And it makes sense from like a trailer perspective, but I do want to see a little bit more of Clive. I think it's important that we get sort of an impression of the character and that we leave the surprises for the game itself. I'm hoping that they're not afraid to reveal too much about Clive because of how intertwined his character arc and the story are. across the entire game, like nonstop. Like it's almost impossible to have him speak without saying something that acts as a spoiler of some kind. But I mean, they got to do something with Clive, because we are being told how much the developers love Clive. One of the interviews, they're like, oh, we love Clive. We poured so much into Clive. We think people are really going to love Clive. We don't know anything about Clive. Well, we know like what we need to know, but like we've been given no real impression of his character outside of he's looking for revenge. You know, that's all we've really gotten to see of him. Now, as for the actual length of the game, the story takes about 35 to 40 hours to complete if you just want to do the story itself, and the game, including side quests, will be about 70 plus hours. You know, thinking into who's doing the combat development, we are talking about somebody who has quite the pedigree. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Devil May Cry 5, Dragon's Dogma. I'm curious to see how they can take that combat system and make it feel good to stretch out across that many hours. Don't get me wrong, I played Devil May Cry for way longer than 70 hours per game across the franchise, you know, every individual game. But that being said, when it comes to those more intense action RPG elements, sometimes that becomes a bit difficult to actually do. And I think that's true of almost any game, even most people's favorite games. It's rare that it's still fresh all those hours later, unless it's done the right way. So I'm hoping that when we actually get our hands on this, that it doesn't just come down to very simple ways of approaching combat throughout the entire 70 hours, and that there is a lot of uniqueness and room to grow and room to improve. And they say there will be, but we'll never know for sure until we play it, right? Speaking of which, the game does have New Game Plus, and it has stronger enemies and equipment will carry over. They basically said in that interview that this is referencing that in New Game Plus, it wouldn't be fun if you just one-shot everything. Sometimes it can be, but it's not something they want. I also recall something I don't see here, and I have to find which interview it was in, but I could have swore I saw a quote saying there was one other difficulty on top of this New Game Plus difficulty. And it made it sound like it was a level 1 difficulty. I really should have found the quote before I started recording this, but I seem to recall something like that. So it's not here, it's not in the overview, but somebody double check that for me. Put it in the comment section below if you can find exactly which source that is, because I'm almost certain that I saw that somewhere in there as well. The battle system style was heavily inspired by Final Fantasy V. Now, I know that doesn't make sense given Final Fantasy V is turn-based and this is action, but it's really the ability customization aspect. Apparently by playing the game and, you know, earning all of these different styles, all these different icons, and, you know, improving and leveling up, you'll be able to kind of mix and match your abilities depending on what you want to do. This actually explains something that we had predicted back in the second trailer for Final Fantasy 16, where we saw that even though he had, I think it was like Shiva was equipped and like his secondary was Phoenix, and he didn't even have Ramuh equipped at all, he was still able to use Ramuh's skills through some way. He like cast lightning on them with Ramuh's staff. And so it's probably this is probably how that was able to happen. So we'll see customization outside of what we're seeing on the HUD. We should be seeing stuff in the menus beneath. And that's something we haven't really gotten a peek at all. It was like the pause menus and the character menus and the level up menus and all that stuff. That's one thing they've really kept under wraps. Now, an important note, we were told this before, but I feel like can't expect everyone to keep up with everything. The game is not open world. It has a large world, but it is not, oh, we will throw you into a wide open field and you will choose to go wherever you want. You cannot randomly visit all 6 of the different countries. Where you venture will be determined by the story, and at some points it will be more limited than others. This isn't too surprising, but it's just setting the precedent that, hey, you're not going to be just running around like hitting the borders and checking for landmarks on a giant open map and deciding when you want to continue the story. You'll be looking to go through the narrative, and along the way you'll find side quests and objectives and things that you can do that will supplement the main story. I'm not going to make, obviously we haven't seen really the maps and their layouts and how Clive actually progresses through them, but when I read that kind of description, it sounds more like Final Fantasy X-ish, which is very hallway-esque, but does manage to give you objectives to branch off and do as you're going through the story itself. I'm imagining, based on the maps, that this is a wider breadth of availability to things as you go through, but we won't know until we actually get to see it. That's another detail we haven't gotten a whole lot about. For example, even if a city might be symbolic, you might not be able to just roam around everywhere. I mean, yeah, essentially saying don't expect to just climb walls and get over things you're not supposed to be able to get over. you will be restricted to like, oh, hey, this is like a holy area. You can't just go there because you want to go there. Things like that. Director Takai says the team decided on an action battle system rather than turn-based because the current market's audience prefers action games. Yeah, kind of a rehash. We knew that already. We've heard that explanation before. And I'm okay with it. I'm a huge fan of a lot of action RPGs. We've played a lot of action RPGs over the years. And as much as I like turn-based, I'm glad Final Fantasy 16, A, got who they got doing the combat direction, and B, is going in this direction specifically for this title because it just looks fun and exciting. So I'm looking forward to it. The game will have a history index you can access to help discover more lore of the world. I wonder how much of that lore comes from outside of Valisthea because, well, especially with the next point, I feel like people are going to be looking for that to see if any history outside of the land has been preserved. Now, this last bit of this is just half of the information we're going to be reading. And the last bit here is kind of condensing what is probably the biggest, I guess I could call it a debate, or I could call it a controversy. That's the word I'm looking for. It is unclear how many main characters will be people of color. Now, in case you're wondering where that's coming from, because it might seem random compared to everything else, IGN, one of their questions was about the diversity in the game. They also asked about a lot of the other standard stuff, but the one question they had that really stood out was about diversity in the game, just because the trailers don't seem to feature many people of color. And Yoshi P gives like a 6-paragraph response explaining how they went through the creative process and saying that while there is diversity, it's diversity representative of the time that they're pulling from, which is medieval Europe. So while yes, Valisthea is diverse and the world is diverse, you may not see like equal representation across everything. It's just going to be diversity representative of the sources they're pulling from. Now, unfortunately, that's about a paragraph and a half of kind of summary I just gave you. The other 4.5 paragraphs are one of those times where kind of Yoshi P over-explains himself, and it's not a good-looking answer. It makes it seem like it's a lot of words to just say no. And I get reading it like that. It really does read like that. You're like, oh, maybe say less next time, Yoshi P. But it doesn't say there won't be. And people have gone back and found characters that are in the trailers that are representing diversity. So there's questions about which characters are representing diversity. You know, Hugo, for example, is he just a dark-skinned Caucasian? There are other characters, though, that have been found in the trailers that show that this isn't just one color cast, essentially. But at the end of the day, diversity is an important thing in the global market, and Square Enix needs to understand that if they are going to be looking into the global market. They've built fantasy worlds, and yes, they are pulling from sources, but it is a fantasy world at the end of the day. So if they know, and Yoshi P acknowledges that he knows this is going to be an important topic, they may just want to make the extra effort ahead of time to not have to do a 6-paragraph explanation about how the diversity is designed in the game, and instead just say, we made sure that there is representation, or representation isn't as strong and we'd like to improve in the future. Something that's short and concise when it comes to this topic, because again, the full answer just does not read well. Just remember, and I want to say this just as like a side note, diversity does not have to be political, does not have to be woke, it does not have to check boxes, meet quotas. It literally just is a state of being. And it's something that just kind of gets left in the dust and forgotten at times. It just needs to not be forgotten and needs to be representative of the people who you are making the game for. And they're making games for everybody, so that is always going to be a topic. It is not going to stop being a topic, so they need to understand that as a company. And it seems like they do. But I read the answer as it's not going to be like 50-50. That was my interpretation of it, of like representation. You know, you're not going to have an even number of this individual group and an even number of this individual group, an even number. It's going to be representative of medieval Europe, which does actually have a decent amount of diversity because of trading and travel back in the time, but is not like the paragon of diversity. You know what I mean? Hopefully, when it comes out, we will see somewhat accurate representations of that, because otherwise, you know, this question is going to come back. Heck, let's be honest, even if there is, this question will come back because people will think that it was done in response to this, even if it's not explicitly stated. So just one of those things. IGN with the gotcha question. There's almost no way they were getting out of this one clean. But yeah, Yoshida, you made it a lot worse with the way that you answered it. It didn't help. Now, moving on to the second half of the information, this is a lot more lore related and answers some questions in regards to some of the dialogue we've heard in the trailers. When a dominant dies, they turn to stone. Now, I'd actually like to expand this because they explain that it's not just the dominants who can use magic and not just the dominants that can turn to stone. There are also other types of individuals that use magic just with the latent ether around. I remembered what they were called yesterday. Begins with a B. It's not breakers. It's not something. It's something like that. But there are just regular magic users, and essentially anyone who overexerts their the use of ether risks killing themselves and turning to stone. And it makes sense given we are told in the second trailer that transforming kind of eats away at the people as they do it, because they are accessing this insane power in order to, you know, summon these icons inside of themselves. Successors can be born immediately or take hundreds of years to show up. So there were times where some dominants were not present in the land. I can't imagine how that operated in regards to history, and hopefully that index gives us a decent insight into that. At the moment, though, all dominants are present within the land. So that seems like something that is preordained, or why the events of the story are moving forward the way that they are. Because the War of the Icons, especially after the Ambition trailer, seems to be like something that needs to happen for whoever the true villain is in order to execute whatever their plan actually is. Now, what's also interesting is in the mural in the Ambition trailer, we see Leviathan. So if all dominants are present, that should mean that a dominant of Leviathan is also present somewhere out there. We haven't seen them, or we don't know if we've seen them yet in any capacity in any of the trailers. But I have to wonder what the naming convention of the mother crystals, it's got to be hinting towards something. They're called like Drake's Breath and Drake's Tail and Drake's Heart, and they all involve drakes. I remember in the first trailer and the first bit of information we got where we saw the map, we thought it was going to be something Bahamut related, but we know that the dominant for Bahamut is the Dragoon in the Empire, Dion, I think his name is, if memory serves. And I mean, yeah, that doesn't seem to be any more indicative of his involvement. Maybe there is something more that I just don't know about, or that we just haven't figured out yet. But I just want to know about Leviathan, because Leviathan can be scary. No two dominants can exist for a single attribute, which is why the existence of both Phoenix and Ifrit is something that is incredibly concerning. Now, of course, in the Ambition trailer, again, we see there's a being resting atop the mural of icons that looks to be a fusion of Ifrit and Phoenix. So more than likely, they were once part of a single icon of fire, and that icon was split for unknown reasons that we will find out in the story. So that is why, technically, there is only one icon of fire. It's just that it's currently split down the middle. No two dominants can exist for a single attribute. Yeah, so there's no such rule that one dominant must reside within one country. The example being, of course, that Wallowed has two dominants that live there, Garuda and Odin. We also know that Jill, who has technically not been confirmed as Shiva, but let's be honest, she's Shiva. She is from the Empire, and obviously so is Dion. So they technically have two, and that's represented in their flag, which has elements of dragons and elements of a saint, and just looks like Shiva. So can't help but notice that. So I don't think this surprised anybody that you can have more than one dominant in a land. Now, for the main kind of plot point, the Blight, it is something that has been mentioned by name. We've seen it in the trailers more and more. And it's slowly sweeping the land. We knew this. We know that the Mother Crystal is one of the only things holding back the Blight. In fact, it is the only thing holding back the Blight, but the Mother Crystals are getting weaker. It's why these lands want to conquer each other. And Yoshi P and director Takai, and I think even creative director Mahiro, make mention of the fact that it's almost kind of a meaningless quarrel, because these countries want to expand their lands because the Blight is taking over. But what does it matter if you're conquering another land if it's just going to be lost to the Blight anyway? So there's this like weird corruption that's happening in the story that's leading to all these countries looking to take each other down. And I'm willing to bet there's somebody whispering in the ears of all the different countries, one like character that's overlapped and is present and is pushing events in the way that they are in order to force this conflict, this war of the icons. So really curious to see what that's going to end up being. 20% of the land to the Wind Continent to the west has been affected by the Blight. So Valisthea is actually made up of two continents separated by the Crystal Dominion in the middle of the map, which is a politically neutral ground. And that area has to play some major importance, but because it separates them, I'm assuming that just the continent to the west is called the Wind Continent, which is just a strange detail to have gotten all of a sudden. Unless, well, there's something else popped into my head. I wonder if anyone else will catch it. But you can kind of already see on the map bits that are grayed out and look like they've been lost to the Blight, especially up to the northwest, a little bit west of Sambrek, for example. There's a lot of grayed out land there. So I have to assume that that's about taken up about the 20%, maybe some areas to the south as well, near the Dalmekian Republic. So that's you know, whatever. We now know it's about 20%. The Blight causes the land to become uninhabitable, resembling that of the moon with oxygen. The big thing is that nothing can grow there, nothing can survive there. Everything that's needed for ecological success, for, you know, plants, it's all dead. There's just no way for anything to survive. So if the whole land were to be taken over, there'd be no way to grow crops, which would mean the animals can't survive, which means the people can't survive, which means nobody can survive. So there's no way anything could survive. It's hard to tell from the 3 trailers who exactly is an antagonist or not. Now, this is coupled with the next point saying that, for example, the King of Sanbreque's name, who we learn is Sylvester, he seems like a villain, but the bigger issue is the corruption in the world. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of conflicting points because Clive goes to, you know, battles with pretty much every different icon at some point or another. You know, we see a lot of them in the trailer itself. And I don't think that Clive is like on a one-man crusade to topple all of these governments. They're just all at a point of conflict where he has to get involved in order to, you know, reach his goal, in order to uncover the revenge that he's trying to he's trying to pursue for the Kingdom of Rosaria and potentially Joshua. we're still not 100% sure of Joshua's fate. I think he survives his encounter. I made mention of that in the second trailer where it looked like he might have been brought to the Empire at some point. But yeah, the villain is very likely whatever is behind this Blight and not any of the individual nations, although it could be somebody in one of the nations. The narrator of the Ambition trailer is someone in the game you will be surprised. You will be surprised when you come across. So they add as an editor's note, it's likely not Jill. I don't know if I 100% agree with that. I mean, you got to remember that we're seeing Clive at minimum 3 different points in his life. And so Jill's voice being a little bit different at 3 different points of her life wouldn't be too surprising either. It probably isn't, but I don't think I can confidently rule out that it's Jill in some way, shape, or form. There's a new character called Byron who has not been introduced yet, but director Takai said his introduction cutscene made him cry. Yeah, he makes mention of how jovial he is and how uplifting of a spirit he is compared to, you know, kind of everything else happening in this world. And he's one of those characters that kind of gives you hope. And so I remember Audrey tweeting that their description of this Byron reminds her of a certain, let's just say that a smile better suits a hero. You know, let's just say that. Byron is described to have an extremely likable personality, very cheerful and magnanimous. A lot of players may end up liking him. Yeah, there you go. And that's all that Audrey posted for the summary of her tweets. Now, again, there is other information that's a little bit more broad sweeping, but all of these are the particular points that it feels worth to actually touch upon. So we'll just have to see about some of the more controversial points here, how it pans out as the game gets closer to release. And yeah, that's going to be it for our coverage on the Final Fantasy 16 interviews. We'll obviously be doing more of these as more information becomes available, but hopefully I got you caught up with stuff that you may or may not have already known. So thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care.